The snow fell mercilessly, blanketing the frozen ground under an unforgiving winter storm. Two golden retrievers, one battered and scarred, the other small and frail, stumbled through the icy wilderness. Their ribs pressed against their skin, their paws bleeding from endless wandering, and their eyes hollow from hunger and despair. Every step was a fight against the bitter cold, every breath a painful reminder of their suffering. But how did these helpless creatures escape such cruelty, and who left them to face this storm alone? What happened next would change their lives, and one man's, forever. The icy wind howled through the dense forest, its frigid bite merciless against the fragile forms trudging through the snow. Two golden retrievers, battered and weary, struggled onward, their bodies pressed low against the relentless force of the blizzard. The larger of the two, his golden coat dulled by frost and dirt, pushed forward with grim determination, carving a path through the snowdrifts. Behind him, the smaller dog stumbled, her tiny legs barely able to carry her. Her frame was delicate, her fur patchy and matted, and every step she took seemed heavier than the last. These two nameless companions had escaped the nightmare of a cruel, desolate shed, where they had been chained and abused. The larger dog had spent countless nights gnawing at his chain, waiting for the perfect moment to break free. When the storm struck, and the shed's door had cracked open under the weight of the snow, he seized the opportunity. With a sharp tug, his chain snapped. He turned to the smaller dog, biting through her tether with relentless urgency, despite his fatigue. Once freed, he nudged her forward, guiding her out into the storm. There was no time to hesitate. This was their only chance at survival. The forest was an unforgiving labyrinth of snow and ice. The storm lashed at them, the cold seeping into their bones. Each step was a struggle, their paw pads bleeding from the frozen ground. The larger dog kept glancing back, watching the smaller one falter. Her movements grew slower, her breaths labored. She whimpered softly before collapsing into the snow. The larger dog stopped immediately, circling back to her side. His deep brown eyes, filled with both exhaustion and determination, searched the surroundings for any sign of shelter. The forest was dark, but through the chaos of the storm, he spotted the outline of an old oak tree with a hollow at its base. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He nosed the smaller dog gently, coaxing her to her feet. She managed a few trembling steps before he guided her into the hollow. The space was cramped, barely large enough for her small frame, but it shielded her from the brunt of the storm. The larger dog squeezed in after her, curling his body around hers. His fur, though caked with ice and snow, served as a barrier against the biting wind. The hours dragged on as the storm raged outside. The larger dog remained alert, his ears twitching at every sound, his body trembling as he fought the cold. The smaller dog pressed closer, her shivering subsiding slightly under his protective warmth. But he knew this hollow was no sanctuary. The wind still found its way inside, and the frost creeping into their shelter would soon become too much to bear. As dawn broke, a faint scent carried by the wind reached the larger dog's nose. It was smoke, wood smoke, unmistakably human. His ears perked up, his instincts sharp. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant warmth and safety. But it also meant people, and the larger dog had learned to fear them. Yet, in this moment, he had no choice. The smaller dog wouldn't survive much longer without help. He nudged her awake, her tiny body barely responding. She opened her eyes weakly, looking up at him with trust and exhaustion. He licked her nose softly, as if promising he would return. Rising to his feet, he stepped out of the hollow and into the snowstorm. He glanced back once more at the small, shivering form nestled in the tree, then turned toward the source of the smoke. The journey was slow and treacherous. The larger dog's legs trembled with every step, his body heavy with exhaustion. The snow was deep, his paws sinking with every stride. The scent of smoke grew stronger, guiding him like a beacon through the blinding storm. Soon, the faint outline of a cabin emerged in the distance, its chimney releasing a steady plume of smoke into the air. The larger dog hesitated, his body tensing with uncertainty. The cabin could be a sanctuary or another place of cruelty. But he didn't have the luxury of doubt. He pressed forward, the warmth promised by the smoke too great a need to ignore. Reaching the porch, he sniffed the air cautiously, his ears flattening as he listened for sounds from inside. Summoning what little strength he had left, he raised a paw and scratched softly at the door. He let out a low bark, desperate but hesitant, a plea for help carried through the storm. This cabin, he thought, might be their last hope. The storm outside roared, a merciless cacophony of wind and snow battering against the walls of Alexander's cabin. The small house stood like a lone sentinel on the edge of the forest, its warm interior a stark contrast to the bitter cold beyond. Inside, Alexander sat in his old wooden chair, the firelight flickering against his weathered face. He stared into the flames, their warmth doing little to thaw the chill that had settled in his heart years ago. The loss of his wife had left a void, and the isolation of the forest mirrored the emptiness within him. A sharp, scratching sound broke through the relentless howl of the wind. Alexander frowned, his rugged hands gripping the armrests of his chair. At first, he thought it was a branch scraping against the cabin, but then the sound came again, deliberate and persistent. Rising slowly, he grabbed a flashlight and approached the door. Living alone in the wilderness had taught him caution, but something about the sound tugged at his curiosity. As he opened the door a crack, the icy wind slammed into him, carrying a flurry of snow into the warm cabin. He raised the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. What he saw made his breath catch. A dog, a golden retriever, stood on the porch, its body trembling violently. Frost clung to its matted coat, and its ribs jutted sharply against its sides. The dog's head hung low, its legs barely able to support its weight. But it was the eyes that struck Alexander most. Deep brown, filled with exhaustion and desperation, they seemed to plead silently for help. "Oh God," Alexander whispered. Without hesitation, he swung the door open wider. The dog took a shaky step forward before collapsing onto the porch. Alexander dropped the flashlight, rushing to the animal's side. "You're freezing," he murmured, his voice soft but firm as he scooped the dog into his arms. Despite its size, the dog felt far too light, its body limp against him. Alexander kicked the door shut behind him, sealing out the storm, and carried the dog to the hearth. The warmth of the fire enveloped them as he gently laid the dog on a thick rug near the flames. Grabbing a blanket from the couch, Alexander draped it over the dog's trembling frame. "Hang on, buddy," he said, kneeling beside it. His rough, calloused hands moved with surprising gentleness as he began to rub the dog's fur, trying to generate some warmth. The dog didn't resist. Its body remained still, save for the faint rise and fall of its chest. Alexander worked quickly, retrieving a bowl of lukewarm water from the kitchen. He dipped a cloth into the water and began cleaning the frost and dirt from the dog's fur. As he wiped away the ice, Alexander's eyes fell on the faint scars that crisscrossed the dog's shoulders and back. His jaw tightened. "What did they do to you?" he muttered, his voice heavy with anger and sorrow. He continued his work, cleaning each paw carefully. The bloodied pads told a story of hardship, of a journey through the snow that no creature should have endured. Then the dog's eyes fluttered open. For a brief moment, their gazes met. In those deep, soulful eyes, Alexander saw something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. Despite its frailty, the dog's expression wasn't one of surrender, but of trust. It was as though the animal believed, against all odds, that it had found safety. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. Those eyes reminded him of his own, of the hollow, aching pain he had carried since losing his wife. He reached out, his hand resting gently on the dog's head. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he whispered. The dog blinked slowly, its gaze unwavering. In that moment, Alexander felt a connection unlike any he had experienced since his wife's passing. This dog wasn't just seeking warmth or shelter. It was seeking kindness, a reason to keep going. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt a purpose stir within him. He sat back on his heels, studying the dog's fragile form. The firelight danced across its golden coat, illuminating its emaciated frame. He couldn't keep calling it Buddy or Dog. It needed a name, something to honor its resilience. Hero, he said softly, the name coming to him as naturally as a breath. That's what you are, a hero for surviving all this. The dog's tail moved faintly under the blanket, a small, tentative wag. Alexander chuckled, a sound that felt foreign in his lonely cabin. Hero it is then, he said firmly, stroking the dog's head. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the cabin, a fragile sense of peace began to grow. Alexander stayed by Hero's side, checking its breathing and rubbing its paws gently to restore circulation. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. "You're safe now," Alexander murmured. But as he spoke the words, he realized they were as much for himself as they were for the dog. For years, his cabin had been a place of solitude, a refuge from a world he no longer wanted to face. But now, with Hero lying beside the fire, it felt like something was shifting, like his quiet sanctuary might become a place of healing for both of them. As the hours passed, Hero's breathing deepened and the trembling subsided. Alexander watched over him, his hand resting on the dog's side, feeling the steady rhythm of its heartbeat. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty, and as Hero drifted into a peaceful sleep, Alexander found himself smiling, a small but genuine glimmer of hope warming his heart. The storm had passed, leaving a stillness in its wake. Snow lay thick and heavy, blanketing the ground and clinging to the trees, their branches bowed under the weight. Inside the cabin, the crackling of the fire filled the quiet morning air, its warm glow bathing the room in soft light. Alexander stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered forest. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Hero lay curled on the rug near the hearth, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm as he rested. His body, though still weak, had begun to relax in the warmth and safety of the cabin. Alexander's thoughts wandered back to the previous night. The dog's resilience and quiet strength had left a deep impression on him. Hero wasn't just a stray looking for shelter. There was a story behind those scars, a history of struggle and survival. Alexander felt a strange but undeniable bond with the dog, a connection born of shared pain and the desire to heal. The sound of scratching at the door shattered the quiet. Alexander froze, his heart quickening. For a moment, he thought it was the wind again, but the sound came again, faint but deliberate. He glanced at Hero, who stirred slightly, his ears perking up at the noise. "What now?" Alexander muttered, grabbing his coat and heading toward the door. The cold air rushed in as he opened it, carrying with it the sharp bite of morning frost. His eyes widened as the beam of light from the door fell on a small, trembling form. There, standing in the snow, was a smaller golden retriever. Her coat was lighter than Hero's, but it was just as matted with ice and dirt. Her thin legs trembled as she struggled to stay upright, and her large, round eyes looked up at Alexander with the same desperation he had seen in Hero's the night before. She whimpered softly, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Oh no, not another one," Alexander whispered, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. He knelt in the doorway, extending his hand slowly. The small dog hesitated, sniffing the air cautiously. Then, as if reassured by the warmth emanating from inside, she took a shaky step forward. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed into the snow. Alexander didn't wait another moment. He scooped the dog into his arms, her small frame fitting easily against his chest. She was freezing, her fur stiff with frost, and her tiny body barely moved. "It's okay, I've got you," Alexander murmured, his voice gentle but firm. He carried her inside, shutting the door behind him to keep the cold at bay. As Alexander approached the hearth, Hero lifted his head. His eyes, still heavy with exhaustion, brightened when they landed on the small dog. He let out a soft, low whine and tried to push himself up, his legs trembling under the effort. Though he was still weak, Hero crawled closer to the small dog, his movements slow but deliberate. Alexander watched, his breath catching as Hero reached the pup. The larger dog lowered his head, gently nuzzling her as she lay shivering on the rug. The smaller dog whimpered softly in response, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. The connection between them was immediate and undeniable. Alexander knelt beside them, his hands moving quickly to cover the smaller dog with a blanket. "Do you know her?" he asked, his voice quiet, though he didn't expect an answer. Hero let out another soft whine, his nose resting gently against the pup's side. The sight tugged at Alexander's heart. He realized then that these weren't just two dogs who had crossed paths, they were family, bound by something deeper than mere companionship. The smaller dog stirred weakly, her head shifting slightly under the blanket. Alexander fetched another bowl of lukewarm water and a clean cloth, repeating the process he had gone through with Hero the night before. He wiped the frost from her fur, his touch careful and deliberate. Her small body shivered under his hands, but the warmth of the fire and the blanket seemed to help. As he worked, Alexander noticed how Hero kept his gaze fixed on the pup, his expression protective and gentle. Despite his own weakness, Hero remained alert, his body angled as if to shield her from harm. Alexander couldn't help but marvel at the bond between them. "You really are something special, aren't you?" he said softly, glancing at Hero. "And you," he added, looking down at the smaller dog, "I think you're her hope." The name struck him immediately. "Hope," he repeated, his voice firmer. "That's who you are." The smaller dog's ears twitched faintly at the sound, and Alexander smiled. He looked back at Hero. "And you, Hero and Hope. Sounds about right, doesn't it?" Hero's tail gave a weak wag in response, and Alexander chuckled softly. For the second time in less than 24 hours, he felt a warmth that went beyond the fire's glow. These dogs, battered and broken as they were, had brought something into his cabin that he hadn't realized was missing: purpose. As the morning wore on, Alexander focused on helping Hope recover. He made a small bowl of broth, coaxing her to take a few sips. Hero watched closely, occasionally nudging her gently as if encouraging her. Alexander couldn't help but feel that Hero had brought her here, guided by the scent of smoke and the bond they shared. It was as though Hero had known this cabin was a place where they could finally find safety. Watching the two dogs together, Alexander felt a profound sense of responsibility. They had been through so much, yet they had found their way to him. And though he didn't yet understand the full extent of their journey, he knew one thing for certain: these two weren't just strays, they were family. The morning sun filtered weakly through the frosted trees, casting long, pale shadows across the snow. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, leaving the room warm but quieter than the night before. Hero and Hope lay curled together on the rug, their bodies finally at rest. Alexander sat nearby, sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes drawn to the two dogs. There was something about them, something more profound than the simple bond of survival. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had been sent to him, that their arrival in the middle of a deadly storm was more than just coincidence. Alexander's thoughts turned to the Bible verses his wife used to read to him. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," she would recite with quiet conviction. He hadn't thought about those words in years, not since her passing. Yet now, with these two dogs appearing at his door, he felt a strange, unshakable sense of purpose, as if he had been chosen to be their shepherd, their guide to safety. As the dogs rested, Alexander's curiosity grew. Where had they come from? Who had hurt them so badly? And why had they chosen his cabin of all places? These questions gnawed at him, refusing to let him simply move on. He decided he needed answers. After bundling himself in his thickest coat, scarf and gloves, Alexander stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the cold biting at his face. Hero stirred as the door opened, lifting his head to watch Alexander. The man knelt down beside him, stroking his head gently. "Stay here with Hope," Alexander murmured. "I'll be back soon." Hero whined softly, his deep brown eyes locking onto Alexander as if to say, "Be careful." Alexander followed the faint trail of paw prints in the snow. Despite the storm, the tracks were still visible, leading away from the cabin and toward the forest. He trudged through the snow, his breath visible in the freezing air. The deeper he went, the more uneasy he felt. The trees, once comforting in their familiarity, now loomed like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. After what felt like an eternity, he came upon a clearing. At the center of it stood a small, dilapidated shed, its roof sagging under the weight of the snow. Alexander paused, his instincts prickling. The sight of the structure filled him with unease, but he pressed on, drawn by a sense of duty and something deeper, almost spiritual. The closer he got, the more the scene unfolded before him. Rusted chains hung limply from posts around the shed, their jagged edges hinting at a violent escape. The snow around the shed was disturbed, the tracks of panicked dogs mingling with larger boot prints. Alexander pushed the door open, the rusted hinges creaking loudly in the still air. Inside, the stench of decay and neglect hit him like a wave. The floor was littered with broken bowls and chewed-up blankets. Against one wall were several cages, their metal bars bent and rusted. The sight of the cages made Alexander's stomach turn. Each one told a story of confinement, of lives spent in suffering. Near the cages, his eyes landed on a small table covered in dust. Atop it lay a weathered notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. Alexander reached for it, his gloved hands brushing away the grime. As he opened the notebook, the first few pages revealed rows of dates and descriptions, records of the dogs that had been kept here. His breath caught as he read the entry labeled #12, breed, golden retriever, age adult and condition strong obedient, resale value high. Alexander's grip tightened on the notebook, anger and sorrow rising in his chest. Hero, it had to be Hero. The description matched him perfectly. The scars, the strength, the loyalty in his eyes, it was all there, reduced to nothing more than a commodity in this vile ledger. Flipping through the pages, Alexander found more details, though many entries were incomplete. Some mentioned medical issues, while others simply had words like discarded or unfit for sale. He felt a wave of nausea as he realized the scale of the cruelty that had taken place here. The weight of the notebook in his hands felt heavier than it should. He looked around the shed again, taking in the remnants of the dogs' suffering. How many lives had been destroyed here? How many Hero and Hope had there been waiting for someone to care? As Alexander stepped back into the clearing, his eyes scanned the forest, half expecting someone to emerge. The boot prints around the shed told him that whoever had done this was likely still nearby, or at least returning regularly. He tightened his grip on the notebook and turned back toward the cabin, his steps quicker now. The weight of the knowledge he carried felt like a burden, but it also fueled his resolve. When he returned to the cabin, Hero and Hope were awake, their eyes fixed on him as he entered. He set the notebook down on the table and knelt beside them. "You've been through so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Hero nudged his hand, as if trying to reassure him. Alexander placed a hand on each dog's head, bowing his own as if in silent prayer. "I don't know what brought you to me," he whispered, "but I'm going to make sure you never have to suffer like that again." He looked into their eyes, one at a time, and saw not just the pain they had endured, but also the hope that remained. In that moment, he thought again of his wife's favorite verses. Perhaps these dogs had been guided to him by something greater, something divine. They had been saved, but so had he, saved from the endless void of his solitude, from the apathy that had crept into his life since her passing. With a deep breath, Alexander rose and turned to the notebook. "This isn't over," he said aloud, his voice steady. "Whoever did this, they'll answer for it." Hero let out a low bark, his tail wagging faintly. Hope snuggled closer to him, her small body pressing against his for warmth. Alexander couldn't help but smile, despite the weight of what he had discovered. Together they would find a way forward, guided by trust, faith, and the unbreakable bond that was forming between them. The snowstorm had settled into a hushed calm by the time Alexander returned to his cabin. The morning light reflected off the blanket of snow, making the world outside seem almost serene, but the weight of what he had discovered in the shed lingered heavily on his mind. Inside the small, cozy cabin, Hero and Hope rested near the hearth, their golden coats glinting softly in the warm glow of the fire. Alexander placed the weathered notebook on the wooden table and sat down, his hands still trembling slightly. The contents of the book were damning, a record of cruelty and exploitation that painted a chilling picture of the horrors Hero and Hope had endured. Alexander leaned back in his chair, staring at the book as his thoughts swirled. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. Justice had to be served. As he reached for the phone to call the police, a sudden knock at the door made him pause. The sound was sharp and deliberate, breaking the stillness of the cabin. Alexander frowned, his heart quickening. Few people ventured this deep into the woods, especially not in the aftermath of a storm. The knock came again, louder this time. Hero stirred, lifting his head, his ears perking up. Though still weak, the dog's body tensed, his instincts on high alert. Alexander stood, his mind racing. He approached the door cautiously, glancing back at Hero and Hope. "Stay here," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if the dogs understood. Opening the door a crack, Alexander was greeted by a man standing on the porch. He was tall, bundled in a heavy coat, with a hood pulled low over his face. His presence was unnerving, his posture tense and aggressive. The man's eyes locked onto Alexander's, then flicked to the table inside, where the notebook lay in plain sight. "That belongs to me," the man said coldly, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Alexander's grip tightened on the door. "I don't think so," he replied, his tone steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. "It's evidence of abuse, and I'm taking it to the police." The man stepped forward, placing a gloved hand on the doorframe. His gaze darkened, his voice dropping lower. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Leave it, and no one gets hurt." Before Alexander could respond, a low growl rumbled from behind him. He turned to see Hero standing unsteadily, his body angled protectively in front of Hope. Though still recovering, Hero's eyes burned with determination, and his lips curled back to reveal sharp teeth. The growl deepened, a warning that sent a chill through the room. The man's eyes darted to Hero, and for the first time a flicker of fear crossed his face. "Call off your dog," he demanded, though his voice wavered. Alexander stepped back, allowing Hero to move closer. "He's not going anywhere," Alexander said firmly, his own confidence bolstered by the dog's courage. Hero barked sharply, his posture unwavering despite his obvious fatigue. The sound was loud and commanding, echoing through the cabin. The man flinched, his bravado faltering as he took a step back. His eyes flicked to Alexander one last time before he muttered, "You'll regret this," and turned to leave. The man retreated into the forest, his footsteps crunching in the snow as he disappeared into the trees. Hero stood his ground until the sound of the man's retreat faded completely. Only then did he lower his head, his growl subsiding. He swayed slightly, his body still weak, but his eyes remained fixed on the door, as if to ensure the threat was truly gone. Alexander knelt beside Hero, placing a hand on the dog's head. "You're incredible," he said softly, his voice filled with both gratitude and admiration. "Thank you." Hero let out a soft huff, his tail wagging faintly. Alexander's chest tightened as he realized just how far Hero was willing to go to protect him and Hope. This wasn't just loyalty. It was love, forged through shared struggle and trust. Without wasting any time, Alexander picked up the phone and dialed the local police. The line rang briefly before a calm voice answered. "This is the sheriff's office. How can I help you?" Alexander took a deep breath. "My name is Alexander. Alexander Gray. I live just outside the forest on the south end. I've found something disturbing." He explained everything: the shed, the cages, the notebook, and the man who had just shown up at his door. The dispatcher listened intently, asking a few clarifying questions before assuring him that someone would be sent to investigate. As he hung up the phone, Alexander felt a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. He had taken the first step, but he knew this wasn't over. Whoever was behind the operation, documented in that notebook, wouldn't give up easily. That night, as the fire crackled softly and the snow outside began to fall again, Alexander sat at the table with Hero and Hope resting nearby. He glanced at the notebook, then at the two dogs who had come to mean so much to him in such a short time. Their journey had been one of unimaginable pain, yet their spirits had remained unbroken. Alexander folded his hands and bowed his head. "Lord, give me the strength to protect them," he whispered. "Help me keep them safe from whatever darkness brought them here." Hero stirred slightly, lifting his head to rest it on Alexander's knee. Alexander smiled faintly, running his fingers through the dog's fur. "Don't worry," he said softly, looking at both Hero and Hope. "You're safe here. I'll make sure of it." As the firelight flickered, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just protecting Hero and Hope. He was standing against something far greater, a shadow that had to be brought into the light. For the first time in years, he felt not only the weight of responsibility, but the strength to carry it. The morning dawned clear and bright, the snow glittering like diamonds under the sunlight. Inside the cozy cabin, the fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. Alexander sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, his gaze occasionally drifting toward Hero and Hope. The two golden retrievers lay curled up together near the hearth, their peaceful expressions a stark contrast to the hardships they had endured. A sense of peace had settled over the cabin in the days following the confrontation. Alexander had done what he promised. He'd reported everything to the authorities, handing over the notebook as evidence. The sheriff and his team had acted swiftly, following the trail of information that led them to the man and his illegal operation. News came quickly. The man had been arrested, and the shed that had once been a prison for Hero, Hope, and countless other dogs was now empty. The story didn't end there. Alexander's neighbor, a kind-hearted woman named Martha, visited the cabin one afternoon after hearing about the incident. She had always known Alexander to be quiet and reserved, but when he told her about Hero and Hope, she saw a spark in him that hadn't been there before. Moved by the tale of the dog's escape and their newfound bond with Alexander, Martha decided to share the story with the local community. She posted on social media, including photos of Hero and Hope nestled by the fire and Alexander standing beside them, a rare smile on his face. The post quickly gained traction. People from the surrounding towns shared it, and soon the story reached farther than anyone expected. Messages of support began pouring in. Strangers offered to donate food and supplies for the dogs, while others simply wrote to thank Alexander for giving them a glimpse of hope and kindness. For a man who had spent years in quiet solitude, the attention was overwhelming but heartening. For the first time since his wife's passing, Alexander didn't feel alone. One weekend, a group of children from a nearby school visited the cabin with their teacher. They brought treats for Hero and Hope, who eagerly wagged their tails and lapped up the attention. Alexander, initially hesitant about the sudden flurry of activity, found himself laughing along with the children as they played with the dogs. "Your story is inspiring, Mr. Gray," the teacher said, smiling warmly. "Hero and Hope found you for a reason." Alexander nodded, his gaze falling on the two dogs. "I think they saved me as much as I saved them." The bond between Alexander and the dogs deepened with each passing day. Hero, though still carrying the scars of his past, grew stronger and more confident. He followed Alexander around the cabin and even accompanied him to his workshop, lying patiently at his feet as Alexander worked on wooden carvings. Hope, with her playful spirit, brought laughter back into the cabin. She had a knack for sneaking pieces of firewood to chew on, much to Alexander's mock exasperation. Together, the three of them created a routine, a life that felt full and meaningful. The once quiet cabin was now filled with the sounds of barking, laughter, and the rhythmic tapping of Alexander's tools. One crisp spring morning, Alexander sat on the porch with Hero and Hope by his side. The forest, no longer shrouded in snow, was alive with birdsong and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. He looked out at the world around him, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "You two," he said, scratching Hero's head and patting Hope's back. "You've given me something I didn't think I'd find again, a family." Hero leaned into his touch, his tail wagging slowly, while Hope rested her head on Alexander's knee, her warm brown eyes looking up at him with trust and love. For years, Alexander had carried the weight of loss and loneliness, retreating into himself after his wife's death. But Hero and Hope had changed that. They had reminded him of the simple joys of companionship and the profound impact of love, even in its most unexpected forms. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Alexander rose from his chair. "Come on," he said with a smile, gesturing toward the workshop. "Let's get to work." Hero and Hope followed him eagerly, their golden coats shining in the sunlight. The three of them walked together, a testament to resilience, love, and the power of second chances. Though the cabin remained a quiet refuge on the edge of the forest, it was no longer a place of solitude. It was a home, filled with life and the warmth of a family, bound together not by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds of trust and love. As Alexander sat on the porch one quiet evening, Hero and Hope lying contentedly at his feet, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the forest in a warm glow, and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze seemed to whisper peace. In this tranquil moment, Alexander felt a deep gratitude for the two dogs who had changed his life. He glanced down at Hero and Hope. Hero, with his steadfast courage and protective spirit, had shown him what it meant to endure and overcome. Hope, with her playful innocence and boundless trust, reminded him that even the smallest light could guide one out of the darkness. Together, they had transformed his quiet, lonely cabin into a home filled with love and meaning. As he rested his hand on Hero's head, Alexander's thoughts turned to the faith he had long pushed aside. In the trials of life, he had let grief cloud his belief in grace and purpose. But Hero and Hope had reignited something in his heart. Their story wasn't just chance, it was providence. "Even in the darkest valley," Alexander murmured to himself, "there's always a path to light." He thought about how these two dogs had arrived at his door during a storm, their resilience mirroring his own struggles. They reminded him that God's love often reveals itself in unexpected ways, through kindness, loyalty, and the unspoken bond between man and his companions. Hero and Hope had taught him to trust again, to find strength in vulnerability, and to see beauty in life's quiet moments. From Hero and Hope, Alexander learned that even when life feels cold and desolate, love and loyalty can reignite the soul. Their journey reflected a truth he had almost forgotten. No matter how broken or lost we feel, we are never alone. Their resilience and unwavering faith in him reminded him to have faith in something greater, to believe in the possibility of renewal even in the face of despair. Hero and Hope weren't just two dogs who needed saving. They were messengers sent to save Alexander from his own isolation. Their courage and companionship became a living reminder of God's grace, working quietly but powerfully to heal and restore. If Hero and Hope's story inspired you, remember that there are many others like them, animals and people, waiting for a chance at love and kindness. Consider opening your heart to a rescue animal, supporting shelters, or simply spreading acts of compassion in your daily life. As you reflect on this story, take a moment to be thankful for the blessings in your own life. Even in the hardest times, there is hope, and love has the power to transform us. Let's work together to create a world filled with kindness and second chances for both people and animals alike. Share this story with those you care about to spread its message of hope, faith, and love. Together we can honor the lessons of Hero and Hope, bringing light to even the darkest corners of the world.